Sharon Salzberg has been meditating for more than 40 years and teaching since the 70s when she co-founded the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. Today we'll be talking about Sharon's own path in meditation. Thanks for coming, Sharon. Nice to have you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to hear more about how you found the path that you're in. What path are you in? So let's start there.
Okay. So I grew up in New York City. I went to college in Buffalo, New York. And when I was a sophomore in college, I took an Asian philosophy course. And honestly, looking back, as far as I can tell, it was kind of happenstance. There was a philosophy requirement, so I had to do a philosophy course. It was convenient for my schedule. It's like it was on Tuesday or something. So I said, okay, I'll do that one. And the course totally changed my life. It was within the context of that course I first heard about the Buddhist teaching. And I first heard about the possibility of meditation practice, that there seemed to exist actually some methods that one could utilize and end up being a happier, more fulfilled, more integrated person. And so the university had an independent study program where if you created a project that they liked, that they approved of, you could go anywhere theoretically for a year and then come back and do your final year. So I created a project for basically my junior year abroad. I said, I want to go to India and study Buddhist meditation. And they approved of it, and off I went.
Wow, and you got college credit for that.
I ended up getting 2 years of college credit for it because, like many people, actually, I stayed somewhat longer than a year in my designated place. And so I left for India in 1970. I began my meditation practice in January of 1971, and I came back briefly within a couple of years to finish school, which was mostly paperwork, and went back to India, and I finally came back in 1974.
Wow. So who did you practice with when you first went to India, and how did you find them?
A lot of it was really happenstance.
Right.
I was looking for something not very philosophical. I didn't want to study endlessly before I learned a technique that I might actually employ. I wanted something very pragmatic, very direct, and I wandered around India a bit trying to find that, and finally heard about this intensive 10-day meditation retreat led by S.N. Goenka, who had just left Burma and was living in India at the time, and he was doing these 10-day retreats. So this was maybe the fourth one he'd ever done. You know, it was brand new, really. And that's where I started, in Bodh Gaya, India, with a 10-day retreat.
Wow. And where was that held? Was it like, he couldn't have had a center yet, did he?
No, he didn't have a center. It was Bodh Gaya in those days. Bodh Gaya is the town that's grown up around the descendant of the tree. It said the Buddha was sitting under when he became enlightened. So it's a very magical, extraordinary place. And in those days, it was really like an itty-bitty little village. And so there was a Thai temple, there was a Burmese temple, somewhat a little bit outside of town. There was one Tibetan temple. And so we were staying in the Burmese temple. And that's where we began.
So it sounds like it seems fateful, you know, like there was a little bit of fate in it. You know, you stumbled upon the class, and then from the class you went to India, you came upon Goenka, and then one thing led to the other. Mm-hmm. So what was the next step after Goenka? Where did you said you were there for a number of years? Or did you continue with Goenka? Or?
I kept sitting with Goenka for quite a while. I also had two other teachers, like very early on, also from different Burmese traditions. One was this man named Anagarika Munindra, who was living in Bodh Gaya. And so he was like a real steady resource for me. And one was a woman named Deepama, or that's her nickname. It's Deepa's mother, Deepama, who'd been a student of Munindra's in Burma many years prior. So my earliest practice was really those three.
Mm-hmm. And so you learned from them, and then you came back to. So what happened after that, between that and coming and starting the retreat center in Barre, Massachusetts?
Mm-hmm. I studied with the three of them. I studied with some Tibetan teachers also in India. I came back for 6 months or so doing what I needed to do. Went back to India, and then in 1974, I was coming back. I should also say that in my very first retreat in January of 1971, I met some people who've become lifelong friends, including Joseph Goldstein. That's where we met. People like Ram Das, Krishna Das, Joseph. So in 1974, I was getting ready to leave India for what I was convinced would be a very brief trip back to the United States, so I can get some things together and then go back and live in India for the rest of my life. And I went to see this teacher, Deepa Ma, in Calcutta, where she lived, to get her blessing and say goodbye for my ever so brief trip back to the U.S. And Joseph had already come back maybe 6 months before then. And when I went to see Deepa Ma, she said to me, when you go back to the States, you'll be teaching with Joseph. And I said, no, I won't. And she said, yes, you will. I said, no, I won't. And she said, yes, you will. I said, no, I won't. And then she said two things that were really important for me. One was, she said, you really understand suffering. That's why you should teach. And it's true. I'd had a very difficult childhood. And she herself had had an enormous amount of suffering in her life and had emerged from it with this tremendous compassion for people. So I had never, before her comment, ever thought of my own personal difficulty as kind of useful, potentially useful for others. So she said that, and then she said, you can do anything you want to do. It's your thinking you can't do it that's going to stop you. So I left her room in her building. I walked downstairs and I kept thinking, no, I won't. I'm not going to do that. I'm just coming back here to live forever. And then I got back to the States, and this is the summer, late spring of 1974. And Joseph, at this point, was teaching at Naropa Institute. It had just opened that summer in Boulder. And so was Jack Kornfield. So that's where they met. And our joke is usually, it's quite accurate, but it's a joke, that of this group of people that had sort of met in India and become friends and were now back in the U.S., Joseph was the only one with a job and an apartment because he was teaching at Naropa. So we all went to Boulder. And at one point, there were like 8 or 9 of us living in his one-bedroom apartment. You know, we just moved in. And he was so popular. This is the first summer session. He was so popular that he was asked to stay on for the second session. And so I stayed on with him, and we were teaching that class together. And subsequent to that, we would get these invitations to teach retreats.
So that was the Deepa Ma prediction.
That was her prediction. That's right. And but this whole time I thought, oh, this is just for now, and then I'm going back. And we'd start to get letters, and it was really Jack, Joseph, and I, and mostly. And sometimes 2 of us would go to lead a retreat in response to a letter, or all 3 of us would go and lead a retreat in response to a letter. And at one point, I thought, oh, maybe I'm not going back to live there. And then we were out in California. Someone suggested.
How long was it when you realized? Was it 2 years after you'd been back for 2 years going, oh, maybe I'm not going back? Or was it shorter than that?
I think it was slightly shorter than that, but it was, you know, it was a while. I really wasn't convinced that my life was here for a while. And somewhere in there, we were out in California, and someone else suggested to us that we start a retreat center, saying, you know, it would be like a sacred site in this country. It would be a place where all that amazing energy that happens when people gather together to practice or with those values, that energy doesn't have to dissipate at the end of the retreat. It could really build and build. And the people who actually knew how to do that, in other words, the people who could be on a board of directors and knew what a mortgage was and all that.
The organizational skills and that sort of stuff.
The people we knew of were all clustered in New England. So we came back and we looked up and down the East Coast and finally ended up buying this property in Barre, Massachusetts.
Wow. I mean, I mean, you're sort of painting a picture of sort of like a very fateful life, right?
Yeah.
So you go to college and you take this class, and then you go to India for a while because you can get some credits and it sounds interesting, and then you come back, and then one thing leads to the other, and then bada boom, bada bing, bada boom, you've got a
Yeah.
retreat center in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So looking back on that, do you feel like it's fate? I mean, you sort of indicated that you sort of.
I probably would say something like that, not because I don't believe exactly in fate. I mean, I believe we have choice all along the way, but certainly there was a trajectory that was not our conscious decision. Like we moved into the retreat center on Valentine's Day, 1976. Still, flourishing. It's really great. And people often say, well, because there was nothing then, pretty much. I mean, there was certainly we were the first center that was started by Westerners and didn't have a kind of singular Asian figure, either here or back in whatever country. So we were making up a lot of things as we went along. Our teachers always had said the meditation practice is not about becoming a Buddhist. Anybody can do it. The nature of the methods, they've been held in the Buddhist tradition, but they're really like universal truths. This is in no way about needing to give up something else or adopt a set of beliefs or a dogma, like never, So that was a very strong influence from our own teachers. And so then we opened up the center, and we had discussions about everything, like, should we have Buddha statues? On the one hand, that is very respectful because that is how we all learned, was in the context of that tradition. On the other hand, it's not about becoming a Buddhist. So,
Right.
So everything was kind of fresh and new, and we had to figure it all out.
Yeah, and that whole fateful thing, and that secular meditation thing. I mean, now it's really common here. We got mindfulness-based stress reduction, and people know what meditation is if you mention it. And I don't even know where I was going with that, but I was going somewhere with that meditation. But I like the fact that it's like sort of, you're talking about sort of a secular meditation thing. And when I first started meditating, I thought that I wanted something really authentic, like really like of a real serious Asian tradition, and go to sort of the origins. And then when I was looking for like a group to learn from and study with, I really quickly like threw that out the window and ended up with our people, like Americans who were doing meditation. And that's where I was sort of most comfortable. And I think I still am, because even though, I think of myself as a meditator, I certainly don't think of myself as a Buddhist, but I'm a meditator in a Buddhist tradition.
Yeah. And I think probably the vast majority of people, say, who come through the Insight Meditation Society, my center, or take a class in New York City or whatever, they don't think of themselves as Buddhists, and nor do I think they need to.
Yeah, and I think there's and so now there's like even terms for that, like the Boo Jews, the Jewish Buddhists, and I think there's other terms like that. They're like the people who are sort of the crossovers, and people are so aware of sort of the meditation and bringing that together. And I don't know, dare I say that like you and Joseph and Jack are probably, are sort of that forefront of pushing that forth and bringing it here and making it sort of acceptable and palatable in a way that sort of people can kind of relate to. So let me sort of veer off a little bit more. I'd like to hear more about what your actual meditation practice has been over the years, and sort of how it sort of morphed and changed and evolved. So anyway, let me.
Yeah, well, my earliest teachers were all either Burmese or had practiced in Burma, studied in Burma. So those are like the mindfulness tools that we're kind of familiar with these days, and more so perhaps in a strictly secular setting. Awareness of the breath, awareness of the body, awareness of emotions, leading to insight. And they were all very strong influences. I had Tibetan teachers early on, but in the end, just because of the nature of my own mind, not in the end, but in that period, like the 70s, it was too confusing for me because when I'd sit down to meditate, instead of actually practicing, I think, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I do this? Should I do that? Which one's better? Which one's faster? Well, those people seem more
Faster for what?
for enlightenment. You know,
Ah,
like those people seem more enlightened than these people, and but then I know these people better than I know those people. You know, so should I do this? Should I do that? So I was basically doing nothing, right? I was just kind of torturing myself, like, which method? Which should I do? So I said to myself, just do something. It doesn't have to be a lifetime commitment. Just choose something for a month or 6 months or something. So that's what I did, and I went to the more fundamental kind of mindfulness tools I was exposed to through my Burmese teachers. So, but I always had a lot of reverence and interest in Tibetan schools of Buddhism. And then in 1984, we'd already established the retreat center. We brought over a Burmese teacher named Sayadaw U Pandita from Burma, whom we had never met, Joseph and I, but we'd heard he was a very great teacher. So he came to Barre. He taught a 3-month retreat, which we sat under his guidance. And the following year, I went to Burma in 1985 to sit with him and get the chance to do very intensive, guided loving-kindness practice. So I did that in 1985 for 3 months. And then that did become my practice for about 4 years, just doing loving kindness practice. And after that, I went back to some mix, and these days I would say largely a kind of awareness practice, some based on my Burmese teachers, some on more current Tibetan teachers that I also have that I study with.
so how do you make the decision, like which way to go, or like how do you make the decision on whether you should do this practice or that practice, or you've morphed it. It sounds like you've morphed it yourself. It wasn't like you have like a guiding teacher. You have teachers, but like you're self-guiding. And so how have you made those decisions over these years?
Well, most of it is intuitive. I'm not very strategic, and a lot of it is if I feel a profound connection to a teacher, then I want to hear and explore what they have to teach. But I'm not the same person that I was back in the day when I would sit and think, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I do this? Should I do that? And if I were to find myself doing that, then I would do the same thing.
You just say, I'm going to just do one thing.
That's
and
right.
Then just pick one.
That's
and then
right.
just do that for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly have the same problems. Like going back and forth, I should do that. And it's almost moment to moment, So, yeah, and actually just pick one, Doesn't matter which one, just pick one,
That's right.
So, what kind of benefits have you gotten from these practices? And then the second part of that question is, do you feel like, do you ever think about what if I hadn't gotten into meditation practice?
Well, it's been 44 years, so it's a little tough to say, because it's really been the core of my life for most of my life.
Right.
I feel like I've gotten all good things from my practice, a sense of integrity, some...
You feel like you got that from your practice?
I do, because I feel like I could see, I think one can see quite directly the consequences of actions, the things we do recklessly that we think like disappeared into the ether. And then you're sitting all those years later and it comes back and you think, ooh, that left a residue that actually was impactful. I don't think I'll do that again. That wasn't as much fun as I thought it was at the time of doing it. Look at that. And so there's that kind of clarity, a much greater sense of compassion for myself and for others.
And can I ask you about the compassion for yourself? Like, how do you feel like that's so beneficial?
Well, even when I teach something like breath meditation, which is a foundational technique. And that was actually the very first instruction I ever heard. You know, I went to India, wandered around India, ended up in Bodh Gaya in the Burmese temple, sitting with Goenka. And that was the first instruction he gave, was sit down and feel your breath. And first of all, I was very disappointed. You know, I thought,
this is all there is?
yeah, I thought, feel my breath. You know, I came all the way to India.
To get enlightened.
And then I thought, how hard can this be? And then it was like, whoa, this is not that easy. I had thought, okay, what'll it be, like 800 breaths, 900 breaths before my mind wanders? And to my absolute astonishment, it was like 1 or 2. And then I'd be gone, and I'd be way gone. And what I heard, but had a great deal of difficulty in believing, was that that's natural and it's not important. What's really important is how we let go of the distraction and start over again, right? Which you have to do eventually, but usually we do it after a long period of judgment. I can't believe I did that. What was I thinking? No one else in the room is thinking. I'm so bad. I'm so terrible. All of which like extends the period of distraction and is also exhausting. So there's tremendous emphasis on that moment after you've been lost. Learning how to let go, learning how to start over. And the secret ingredient in that is really some compassion for yourself. Because for all we think self-condemnation is going to get us far, it doesn't. You know, it just leaves us tense and tired. Whereas if we can have some compassion for ourselves, pick up again and start over, we make much more progress. And so I think that that tool that we can refine in the formal meditation practice, that's like a life lesson we bring right into work or whatever we're doing, because we're always sort of making mistakes or veering off course or falling down or something. We have to pick up and start over all of the time.
Mm-hmm. So connecting the self-compassion probably makes you more compassionate
Mm-hmm.
to others then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The practices over the years have sort of evolved, but it doesn't. I hope this isn't offensive, but it doesn't sound like it's evolved very far. I mean, it sounds like you're really.
My practice.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you've done this sort of the same things: the breath, and then the loving kindness for 40 years. Is that true?
In some version. I mean, no, I think that's not unfair to say.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference between methodology and experience,
Oh
right?
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yes.
so I
I'm
don't.
speaking methodology.
Yeah.
I'm not judging.
Yeah, no, I got that. It took me a moment, but no, I got that.
You know what I
So-
think? No, don't.
yeah, and I think that's
Yeah.
interesting, you know, also because I don't know that the methods need to get more elaborate. Obviously, they get more refined, you know, because we can be pretty clumsy in the beginning, but so there's a certain subtlety, of course, and evolution of the method, but that's not where the change takes place. Like now I took the advanced course, you know, and now I have the super special instruction. I'm going to do something totally different from what I did before. I don't think it's like that, but of course your internal experience changes enormously.
But not so much the practice, though. I mean, would you say that's correct? I mean, so like your internal workings have sort of changed and evolved, but not so much the practice itself.
Yeah.
The practice has sort of always been the same, but you've sort of, yeah. I was going to say something else now. I forgot again. But I think that's kind of interesting. I mean, sort of talking about going back to the fate thing, which I keep going back to, is, you know, you sort of really kind of found something that really worked for you and really clicked for you. And you didn't really like kind of go searching all over, you know, that it really sort of clicked for you. It seems, I mean, would you agree with that?
I mean, I did some searching, and I've had a lot of, by this point, I've had a lot of exposure to a pretty wide variety of methods and techniques, but within the Buddhist context, because I've never really left that.
What other ones have you sort of looked into?
Well, I mean, even just in the beginning, you know, Goenka taught awareness of the breath at the nostrils and then a body scan. Menindra would talk about mental noting and walking meditation. Deepama was who she was, you know, and she just infused everything with tremendous love. And then there was Upandita, who was my loving kindness teacher. And there are actually 4 qualities that are taught together, which you can do in terms of method. You could do in a distinct way: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, or joy in the happiness of others, and then equanimity, or balance of mind. So there was all of that. And then I have my Tibetan teachers, you know,
Oh, yeah.
and those practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we're sort of almost out of time. But I wanted to ask you, where can people find you and sort of find out more about you?
My website, SharonSalzberg.com, Salzberg. And that would probably be the best way, because then there's a conduit to the Insight Meditation Society or my schedule, whatever.
Yeah, that's great. Sharon, I'm so happy you could come today, and it's been such an honor to sit and talk with you. It always seems like the time is so short, but I'm really, really happy to have you. And because we both live in New York, where we both spend a lot of time here, I'm sure I will be hearing from you again in the future.
Great, thank
so
you.
much.